I have a rather non-traditional background when it comes to being an author. I have always been fascinated by human behavior and what makes people do the things that they do. I was the first person in my family to go to college.
Mhm.
So, in my mind, an education was my ticket to a stable job, financial stability, being able to take care of myself, being independent. And being a writer did not seem to match any of those goals. And so I got my bachelor's, I have two masters, I have a doctorate. I did my internship at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. I did a 2-year research fellowship at Children's National and became a doctor. I was a pediatric neuropsychologist specializing in working with children with brain tumors and leukemia, and absolutely loved my work, loved the patients, loved the families. The losses were absolutely heartbreaking, but the successes were phenomenal. I did not love dealing with hierarchy, bureaucracy, insurance companies, all those fun things that we have here in the
Oh, wow.
United States.
Yeah, that's
And
crazy.
so, yeah, and so eventually I love to write. I had submitted short stories, I'd written poems, I was big into grants and research articles, but there was something in my heart saying how you're connecting with people is not the way you're supposed to be connecting with people. There's more to it than just being on this tenure track and doing the next thing you think you're supposed to do. And so I eventually moved from working at a hospital to being in private practice so that I would have more control over my schedule, and started taking my writing more seriously and working on my first book. And it's been such a process over the years. I have learned so much. But yeah, following my heart and my dream was not easy by any stretch
Mhm.
of the imagination. I
Yeah.
was fortunate to have a lot of privileges that not everyone has to help me along the way. I
Mhm.
have a husband. I could not be doing this on my own the way that I
Yeah.
am doing it without his support. But yeah, it's been a fantastic journey.
That's fantastic to hear. So, how did you navigate the transition from such a, demanding medical career to focusing exclusively on your creative writing passion?
It was actually a really scary transition. I'm a Capricorn, and so I am type A. I like my schedules, I like rules, I love my routine. And being a creative author, there's kind of none of that.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
I really had to learn how to build in schedules and new habits for myself because I didn't have a supervisor or a boss or a department head saying, this is what you need to do. This is when it needs to happen. You need to write this many chapters by the end of the week. Especially in the beginning, when you're writing your first book and you're hoping that it gets published, it's really just you and the people in your life that are cheering you on. And so it was a process. I made a lot of mistakes. I figured out what didn't work with balancing a medical career and a writing career. And I learned how to reschedule my writing time. When I was working full time at the hospital and writing, I would probably start writing at 10 or 11 at night, and I'd usually write until midnight or 1 a.m. and
Mm.
then get up, be back at the hospital 6:30 or 7 the next morning. And once I had control over my schedule with private practice, then I was starting to write during the morning or maybe in the afternoon. And I was so worried that my creative muse wouldn't follow me because I was so used to this crazy schedule running on fumes. Thank goodness she did. She has
Oh, that's
showed
great.
that. But there's no as many craft books as there are out there, there's no formula or prescription for how you become an author and what that journey looks like. And it's going to be different for every single person based on so many factors in their lives. This is also something I was able to do because I have stepchildren and they're older. If I had had younger children during this who needed attention much more frequently than teenagers do, like at least teenagers can make their own lunch, they can,
Yeah.
get themselves around. If I had
Yeah.
completely dependent children, this schedule would have looked very different.
And actually, I want to like follow on from that. I know you said like every author's journey is different. So when you started, this transition, did you, you mentioned a bit about wanting to be like published. Did you want to be originally like, traditionally published or hybrid published or self-published? How did you go about, choosing that journey for yourself, or how did that end up looking for you?
That's a great question. I think one of the things we're so fortunate in the age that we live in is there is more than one path to publishing a book.
Yeah.
And while that definitely brings some challenges, it also brings so many opportunities because now, if you want to write something and put it out there, there is an audience for it. And I
Yeah.
love that we've really been able to tap into some very specific, very niche. I tell people all the time, if you have an interest, write a book and put it out there because there's an audience for it and they will find you. I think for me, the gold standard in my mind growing up had always been traditional publishing. You get an agent, you get a huge book deal, it immediately hits the New York Times bestseller list. You're like front page of the Sunday Times, and reality is so very different from
We all start off like that.
from those dreams that we
Yeah.
have. And so
Mhm.
I originally, I wrote my first book and started querying agents with it. And I kept getting the same feedback, which was love your work, love your writing, think you'd be great to work with. I'm not taking another young adult author this year. And I had 3 agents in a row respond and say the same thing, which I was
Mhm.
appreciative that they responded because a lot
Yeah.
of times you hear about people being completely ghosted by agents. And
Yeah.
so I was fortunate to work with an incredible editor for my series, A.R. Capetta. They are an amazing award-winning author, LGBTQ plus activist, just an all-around phenomenal person. And so I was talking with them and saying, what do I do with this kind of feedback? Because they're not telling me I need to change anything. They're not saying anything is bad or wrong. They're just saying I'm not the right person for them and my story isn't what they're looking for. And so I, after doing a bunch of research, came to the conclusion, as an author, I need to build a platform. The only way I can do that is by getting my books out there.
Yeah.
In the world we live in now, I don't have to wait for an okay from anyone to put this content out there. And
Yeah.
so, do I want to keep querying and talking to people for another 6 months to 2 years? You never know how long it's going to take. And I
Mhm.
decided no, that I knew the books were good because I'd worked with extremely experienced professionals in putting them out. And so I decided to go the hybrid route. And what that meant for me was I would foot more of the publishing cost up front, but then
Mhm.
I would receive higher royalties at the back
Mhm.
end. And
Mhm.
I would have a lot more control over my work while also working with a reputable indie hybrid publisher who I knew could help me get into bookstores, that could help me participate in author events. And so I ended up working with Spark Press for the 3 books, and it was a phenomenal experience. I loved it. I'm still waiting on that New York Times bestseller and, front page on the Sunday Times or the Telegraph, but hopefully that's coming. Hopefully that's next.
Yeah, and actually it's like very profound that you actually said that, because a lot of authors or aspiring authors don't, they like have like rose-colored glasses when they, first decide I'm gonna put this out there, I've written this, I'm really proud of this, and like I'm gonna be published and traditional published and it's gonna be this and it's gonna be great. And it's like sometimes like the reality can be a bit jarring, but as long as you're passionate and you're driven and you believe in what you've written, there's a way forward for you, and there's more than one way forward. And what you mentioned about like agents not hearing back or not like getting any feedback at all is something that a lot of authors experience. And one thing that I've learned from like authors and talking to a lot of people is that sometimes like the agents, it comes down to like what they like, or like what their preference is in reading or something like that. So it's never really about your book. It's about you finding somebody who actually believes in what you've written and you're putting forward. So there's not more than one way forward, but like it can be like really debilitating. If I've said that right, debilitating, like that first jarring feeling when you step into the publishing industry for the first time and you realize like it's actually really closed off, unfortunately.
Yes, that was so, I could not have said that better myself. It's so true. And I think, writing is such a creative, personal process. And then we're tasked with taking this piece of our heart and soul that we have put on paper, packaging it, marketing it, and selling it as a product. And at the end of the day, that's what a book is. It is a product. But I think what's been really helpful for me is looking at what are my goals as a writer. And that's helped me figure out what opportunities do I say yes to? What kinds of things do I pass on? Where do I spend my time? And, I'm in this for the long run. This is, yes, you hear amazing stories of overnight successes and people who just skyrocketed to the top with a rocket on their back. That is incredibly few and far between. Congratulations to those people.
Yeah.
The best advice, and probably the advice that I have heard the most from people, is be persistent in this industry. Keep showing up. Keep putting your work out there. I remember when I started my second book, my PR team said, this is great because do you know what sells your first book? Your second book. And do you know what's going to sell your first two books? Your third book. So no pressure at all. No pressure.
Yeah.
But they're actually right. It takes time to connect with readers, to build an audience, to get your name out there in some way, shape, or form. And it's a process. And I think we don't always know about, as you said, the behind the scenes and the business aspect of what it's like to be a writer. We do have these rose-colored glasses of how maybe what a Hallmark movie has made us think, or a TV show has portrayed writing as, and it is never, it's never like that.
It's never like that.
Exactly. And that's fine. It's really figuring out what you want from your writing career. I know people who just wanted to put out a memoir because they wanted something to pass on to their children and grandchildren. They don't want a writing career. They're fine to just write one book and that's it. I think really figuring out what you're hoping to get out of it and what are the steps that you can realistically take to get there is a really good place to start in moving forward with this thing we call a writing career.
Yeah, and that's really a great advice. So your writing has been featured in a wide array of publications, from